All right, well, it's time to start, and I am really excited about this workshop, Working in Water. And I have my good friend, David Franklin, who I owe a lot of my professional background to. David was one of my original trainers, and I've enjoyed working with him and collaborating on all sorts of projects through the years and different trainings that we've done together. So David is who I think is probably the most prolific trainer of record in the state. He trains a lot of people, very knowledgeable, and has quite an extensive background. So I want to give David as much time as possible. So David, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and then let's jump into it.
Sure, John. Thanks for having me again this year. Well, you know, mostly now I do training for the industrial and construction permit and other related classes, but I do try to keep my feet on the ground and help construction sites and industrial facilities. I'm a big proponent of learning from each other. Being a trainer of record means that we hear other people's information and expertise, and so then we get to turn around and share it with other people. So that's why in this short 1 hour, I'm hoping that people can add their comments in chat or bring something to the table beyond what I might be pointing out, because I think we all have something to learn from each other. So this little movie that I was showing a minute ago, I don't know if anybody noticed, but we had like tires floating away and straw bales. And so the question is, where did the straw bales come from, right? And well, earlier that day, the straw bales and the plastic sheeting and the gravel bags were in the channel, along with some equipment. And there's a different movie I have that shows the oil pan from underneath that excavator floating away. So why does this kind of problem happen where straw bales are washing away? It was actually in the stormwater plan to have straw bales and plastic sheeting and gravel bags as a temporary solution in the stream. And I like to ask the question, what is the first BMP in the book? The first BMP is scheduling, planning, not being in the water body at the wrong time. And yet there are different forces that make this happen time and time again, right? So, you know, that was later in the day or the next day, everything washed away. But what contributed to that happening? Planning and design. We mentioned that the first BMP in the book is planning. And so, you know, the civil engineers pretty much have it dialed in for the final condition, don't they? They know how to build it so it doesn't wash away. And so one of the first ideas I like to share is that the temporary mimics the permanent. And that means that if we're looking for a temporary sediment control, it should mimic the permanent sediment control a lot of times. We'll explore that idea a little bit more up ahead. And there are various permits required to be in the stream, right? Well, in this job, you know, anytime we work in or impact directly the water body, we're supposed to get permission from the regional board through the 401 certification process. And when the applicant fills out the 401 application, the regional board has the ability to comment, or it might time out. I think it's 30 days. And if the regional board has not commented, well, then the operator can proceed. So on this project, the regional board did not impose any limitations, any restrictions. And what is one of the best BMPs for working in water? Limitations, prohibitions. You know, when we look at a fact sheet for a best management practice, there are many sections, 9 sections, like definition, typical applications, specifications to implement, limitations, prohibitions. And that's one of the most important part about working in water, is when we should be there or shouldn't be there, or the equipment cannot be there at the end of the day, things like that. So in this project, no comment was given back to the operator. And so that's part of the failure. We need to have limitations from the regulators issuing the permits. Now, sometimes the contract will say contractor must proceed within 60 days or 30 days of award. So now that's a problem, because maybe it's not the ideal time for the environment. And suddenly we are desiring to make them impact on the stream bank when it's not ideal. The rains are coming. So there's a conflict there. Funding. On this job, the accessibility to the grant funds was running out. Only so many months ahead could the contractor get those funds. So now we're chasing the funds instead of protecting the environment. So that's another conflict. And the SWIP, the BMPs, it's hard to know what kind of temporary solution could deal with the river coming from the rains. And so this is what they had in the SWIP, and so the contractor did it, but it wasn't the right solution, right? It's hard to know what a legitimate solution is. And at the end of the presentation, I have a little discussion on, other than not being in there at the wrong time, what might be something you could do before the job is finished. Because that's what we as SWIP managers must always keep our eye on. How do we survive before the finished condition? That's our question. So applicable permits, we've got industry guidance, and we've got the reality of our empirical assessment of the site conditions. So maybe they're input from the designer, the inspector, or the enforcer. And of course, there's no better enforcer than Dirty Harry. Let's look at some industry guidance. So the categories of BMPs, I always like to point out that in our industry, we have a bad habit of going to the toolbox and pulling out a crescent wrench to paint the kitchen, because we're not isolating the different categories of BMPs, like planning and scheduling is the first one, and soil stabilization, concentrated flow, run-on, runoff, sediment control, housekeeping, and non-storm water. So in our construction permit, more or less, those are the main categories. But what's missing? All thinking chimps want to know what's missing. And there's a component called working in water. And where would we ever find that component, that BMP? There's a hidden little secret. Wow, look at that job. I want to be on that job. Nice native grasses and clear water. So we have these BMP manuals. This is one from the olden days. Everybody see how that's from the olden days? I don't see that one floating around anymore. But this is the Caltrans table of contents for the temporary soil stabilization, which sometimes we call erosion control. sometimes we call raindrop protection. Protection from the raindrops is SS3 through SS8. And then SS 9, 10, and 11, those are for the concentrated flow condition, right? We want to divert water, convey water, release water in a concentrated form. That's 9, 10, and 11. But here's the little secret, everybody. You know what SS12 is about? It's how to do the first 11 when you're in the water body. That's the hidden BMP. How to do the first 11 when you are working in or near the water. And time after time, we will see jobs that are in or near the water, and they don't pick stream bank stabilization, which is guidance on how to be there. That's kind of odd, isn't it? That's where we get good information. So this project here, the scope of work was hauling off illegally dumped dirt to create floodplain capacity. The floodplain terrace needed capacity. And the other part of the work was to make a public access trail. Okay. So the final design called for fiber rolls in the floodplain. And I am concerned that over the years, we've become obsessed with fiber rolls, linear barriers of any kind, but largely fiber rolls because they're lightweight, inexpensive, and we can throw them everywhere. I like a fiber roll as much as the next erosion control junkie, but they don't apply everywhere. And you know, the book that nobody reads, that BMP manual that nobody reads, it says, what does it say? What does it say? It says, put fiber rolls above the high water level, not in the water. That's what it says. It says, don't put them in the flow, the concentrated flow. And what is the high water level? Well, it says here, often corresponds to the edge of the stream side terrace. So put them above the floodplain terrace, not in the floodplain. And remember, when we look at the BMP manual, it's good industry guidance. We might disagree and ignore, for good cause, certain things. And we might also be much more strict than the general industry guidance. We can go either way based on our professional experience, judgment. So this job that called for fiber rolls as the final condition, and I'm going to ask everybody to make a note that if you're writing or reviewing a stormwater plan, let us not be confused by the final design. We can acknowledge the final design, but when we write or review a SWIP, we want to know that the SWIP's focus is the temporary solution during construction. Don't be distracted. Don't be quoting. Don't be pointing to the final design. We want to know about it, and we will build it, but it's not how we survive before the final design. That's where our focus is. So on a very short job in the late summer, early fall, that's supposed to be done before the rains come, how did that happen? How did the sprinklers catch the fiber rolls that shouldn't have been in the floodplain? They shouldn't have been in the floodplain for several reasons. But again, this job got delayed. It was supposed to be done in August and September, but it got delayed and it went into September. Now, at some point, we have to say, maybe we need to wait till next year. But does the owner want to do that? Do you really want to apply for another permit next year or extend it? There's a lot of resistance to saying, let's not do the job. And so as a result, the willow trees caught some anacondas, the runaway fibrils. You see, they came back later on due to the addiction to fibrils and said, I bet we probably have to have a fiber roll there because everybody wants fiber rolls. So they put the method in that doesn't wash away. And what method is that? If we're ever putting a fiber roll for good cause, like a check dam, maybe in a swale, we're supposed to use the tie down method. You see, those stakes are not through the heart like the vampire. They're outside of the fiber roll with ropes going from notch to notch. And now it cannot wash away. And it didn't. But it has no value. So here's a little secret on why we don't put fiber rolls in a floodplain. The direction of flow can be two directions. You might have sheet flow coming off your disturbed area. And now the fiber roll is properly placed perpendicularly. And that's the concept in the upland areas. But during flood conditions, the flow is going that way as a concentrated flow. And it's washing away the sediments behind the fiber roll. So what good is the fiber roll if the floods are washing it away? So that's one idea. The BMP manual says don't put them there. And the principles of erosion and sediment control say don't put them there. But you might have a condition where you say, I've seen fiber rolls, I've seen coir logs in the stream bank. So why are we saying we shouldn't do it? And you know, this whole business of erosion and sediment control and stream bank stabilization and plant establishment, there are different objectives. If we have like a coir log on the toe of the stream bank or on the face of the stream bank, you know, which is off to the right here, right? Over here is where the stream bank is. Well, that coir log might be designed for preventing or reducing scour from that bouncing thalweg, that low point, that energy point bouncing around in the stream. So the coir log might be temporary buffer against impact. Or it might be a place to pound in some willow stakes and other vegetation so that it's able to be established and deeply rooted with some help from the coir log. So we have different objectives with these different practices, right? You can see here that the straw washed away. Off to the left, you can see there's a bunch of straw. You see that? And here's the straw in the trees. Why was there straw in the floodplain? Well, when I was walking the job, I said, what's the right thing, David? And I said, coconut netting. Coconut netting is rated for shear stress and velocity and scour prevention and wave action. Coconut netting would have been good. And so I walked up to the beginning of the floodplain and I looked on the ground and there was a roll of coconut netting staked in place, stapled in place very nicely. And I said, why did they just put one roll down? And I thought about it and I postulated that somebody said, that's expensive and slow. We have sprinklers. It hasn't rained in years, and it hadn't very much. And so maybe they thought they would get the seed sprouted under the straw with the sprinklers, and it would all be okay. And it might have been okay, but the rains came hard and heavy that year and early. And they were delayed into December. So the straw washed away, the fiber rolls washed away. And neither of those had to be there. Just coconut netting holding down the seeds would have helped the seeds establish and not wash away. Stream bank stabilization. You know, I mentioned briefly the 401 application, and it's under the Clean Water Act, Section 303D, that the impaired water bodies are listed, at least narratively, and then eventually TMDLs are established numerically. And so the guidance for a qualified SWIP developer is that they should check the regional board requirements. And the 401 requirements are like this. They're issued by the regional boards to certify or deny the construction activity proposed, impacting waters of the state. And when there's an Army Corps job, of course, that will trigger application for the 401 from the regional board. And the regional board will translate that 401 application into a waste discharge requirement, giving guidance on the proposed activity. So the regional boards, you can see on this map, there are 9 of them. And the idea is that each regional board is supposed to protect a major basin, watershed, drainage of California. And so they write up a basin plan. And so the basin plan, you know, in the Central Valley, if you want to build some homes, well, maybe you bought some land from a farmer, and the creek next to your proposed homes is impaired for diazinon because farmers used to use diazinon and it's now outlawed. And so that creek would be called impaired for diazinon if you were to look in the basin plan. So if you're going to build homes impacting that creek, the regional board would probably say, you're going to push dirt around that's probably filled with diazinon residue in the winter storms. We want you to sample for diazinon in your runoff so you're not adding more to the creek. So that's how the regional boards have the ability to represent the local concern for the water bodies. The water bodies that have to be inventoried under the Clean Water Act, all states must inventory their water bodies and see what good they are. Like down in Newport Beach, what good is Newport Beach? Well, swimming. The children like to swim there. And what is the impairment for swimming? Bacteria. So where's all that bacteria coming from? We have to find out. We have to recognize it's not good for swimming. But if you're up in the Central Valley, what good is the water there? It might be agricultural irrigation. So if there's bacteria in the irrigation water, does the lettuce care? No, the lettuce doesn't care. We might care if we're going to eat the lettuce, but it doesn't hurt agricultural irrigation. What hurts agricultural irrigation? Salinity does. Does the lettuce want to have salty water? No. So we have to say, where's the salt coming from and what are we going to do about it? So you see, the regional boards have a very difficult job to know their basin, know what good the water is, know what's hurting it, and how much hurt is too much hurt. And so they do have to be involved when we impact a water body. And so like in the regional board 2 for the Bay Area, their website says Anybody altering the physical features of the floodplain or installing trails and bridges? And remember that job with the anacondas and the willow trees, that's what they were doing. They were taking illegally dumped dirt from the floodplain and building a public access trail. Exactly what's described here. And there's the trail. And so part of the trail washed away, and it's hard to know. They came back later and put concrete here, but who would have known that this is the exact point where the floodplain would erode? You know, it turns out that there was like a little channel over here from the commercial areas off to the right there. And so this channel, when the floodwaters were receding, there was a very big surge of energy as the waters tried to get into that channel. But further back, it was calmer, even during the dewatering of the receding flood. But it's hard to know where that break point would be, isn't it? And so nature told the designers, I guess you should use concrete up to this point, beyond which it'll not erode. So we do need empirical follow-up to what our calculations proposed. And so it says that prior to doing any work, the applicant must submit an application for certification. And it's $1,000 a day if you don't apply, and $10,000 a day if you're doing the work without the permit. Wow. So in the San Francisco Bay, they have their water quality objectives, and they can be narrative or numerical. And a narrative is a general description prior to an actual number being discovered or required for compliance. So on this San Francisco Regional Board process, it also says that any water body that's impaired for sediment, your construction activity shall not create a nuisance, specifically meaning you cannot increase the turbidity downstream by 10% when the upstream turbidity is 50 or more. So that's a very specific standard in which this job should have been sampling the river to see if there's an increase in stream. And this job, the SWIP, said that the regional board requirements had been considered in writing the SWIP. I couldn't find evidence anywhere for this job that there was a 401 certification applied for, commented on, issued. But the SWIP still said the regional board requirements were considered. So if we're ever writing or reviewing a SWIP, I think we should all agree that it's not enough to say the regional board requirements were considered. I think we need to say something more specific. We need to acknowledge proactively that it's been determined by this QSD that nothing is required. All right. Don't just leave that generic language in the SWIP. Let's comment on what the regional board's basin plan says. This is an impaired water body that's supposed to be sampled. You know, the annual report for this project, it said there were 8 qualifying storm events, and none of them were sampled. Now, we don't know all the details. We don't know why they didn't sample, but they did have to explain it. And what did they say in the annual report? They said, all the stormwater infiltrated into the ground and no discharge ever occurred. When does runoff occur? When the ground is saturated. When does flooding occur? When the ground is saturated. So the flooded condition, washing away fiber rolls, is a pretty strong indication that there was discharge. You know, the reason we're here today is because the rivers used to catch on fire. For decades, lots of rivers caught on fire. This is the Cuyahoga. It caught on fire 13 times over 100 years. And because of the Cuyahoga River catching on fire, they passed the Clean Water Act. This picture is from 1952. So it's important that the different laws and agencies in charge control our impacts to the water bodies that belong to everybody. The local people now, under the Clean Water Act, have permission to comment and protect the waters. The federal government, oftentimes under the 404 Army Corps application, and regional boards under the 401, and Fish and Wildlife under the 1602 Stream Bank Alteration Agreement. So there are different players when we're working in water. Different kinds of inspectors, sampling technician, and of course everybody wants to be Dirty Harry. So let's look a little bit here at the categories of BMPs and which one of them are addressing our topic today of working in water. So this category is non-storm water. And I'm looking through there. Temporary stream crossing. Wow. Sounds like we're in water there. Ooh, diverting the stream. That's quite an important one. Dewatering. Many times we are dewatering the impounded water behind a dam. What if you divert the stream so that you can remove sediments from behind a dam? You know, there are many dams in California and many operators generating energy from the dam. And you know what dams live for? There's just one thing a dam lives for, and that is to build up sediment behind it. That's right. The only purpose for a dam is to build up sediment behind it. Well, you know, that's what happens. And so people who operate dams and energy, they have a never-ending job of diverting the stream at the, low flow time of year, and then dewatering the impounded water behind the dam so that they can remove sediments. And sometimes they have to buy property so that they can make mountains with the sediment they took from behind the dam. It's called mountain building from dam sediments. That's the scope of construction sometimes. So, temporary stream crossing. There was a job years ago down on the southern border where they were doing a big energy job. And I would just like to mention that we've been, of course, seeing billions of dollars being spent in California on massive energy projects, a lot of times out in the desert. So I think we have a big red flag happening on a lot of these energy projects where they're far from scrutiny. They are out in the monsoon rains of the summer. They have a lot of fugitive dust issues. And so I think the regulators need to up the game on some of these projects out there that are just they're not getting a lot of environmental protection, and they're focusing on building those energy projects, right? So it is a big problem we're having in the state that's, I don't think, being discussed very much. But so years ago, there was a project that was doing windmills, wind turbines. And what they really needed on day one was a low stream crossing, a temporary stream crossing, low water crossing, which is a BMP. Now, this is that project, and we have 6 feet erosion times 1 feet deep for 3,000 feet. So we could figure out how many tons of dirt ended up on the neighbor's septic field. But more importantly, we want to know, how did this happen? Why did hundreds of tons end up on the neighbor's property? And here it is. You see, we have to stop thinking that silt fence is supposed to go around the whole job. We have to stop. This is silt fence blocking an ephemeral stream. This is not the place for silt fence. And admittedly, there's a problem here because you've got biological concerns and you're not supposed to go outside of the footprint and disturb into this other area here. So you couldn't even be wrapping the silt fence up the ephemeral stream, I guess, because you're supposed to stay close to the disturbed footprint of the job. But nevertheless, this is not a place to stop the stream. And we just saw the proof of it. So this silt fence ended up diverting water to the neighbor's property. This is where we want that low water crossing, a temporary stream crossing. Some kind of ability for the vehicles to drive through this low point and not raise up sediment. And the BMP for temporary stream crossing gives us many options. So this is an example of using the wrong BMP, the wrong category. They put a sediment control where we need a low water crossing. The water should have permission to go across the job and keep moving. Should have been the first thing done. And the permits issued should have said so. A lot of times you have to, you cannot find a 404 permit. We need to have an industry agreement now that the SWIP will include all other pertinent permits. Before the current permit for construction came out, the old permit and SWIP templates had a section called Other Plans and Permits and References. And I'm not seeing such a strong demand anymore in our paperwork process that insists on having a copy of the other permits issued. This job could not get, you had to submit a Freedom of Information Act application. And it shouldn't be that way. We need the water board to start to demand that other permits are part of the permit registration process and must be available to the public. So the Clearwater Diversion BMP is many pages, and it's a very important topic because we're supposed to go into a stream, stop the stream, divert the stream, not create turbidity when we release the stream further below, maybe behind the dam, so that we can remove sediments from the dam. And So it's many different techniques for doing it well. And there's a dam that's going to, always need sediment removed. Now, on this project, the specs, the contract bidding documents said that the contractor must submit a diversion plan. And so the problem with what happened was, for all the contractor knew, their plan for diversion was a list of equipment, pumps of this manufacturer size and pipes welded together to divert the water. It was a equipment and material list. Okay, so that's not a plan, is it? No, it's not a plan to just list equipment. The plan has to talk about how to stop the low flow, how to put the pump in the water without raising sediments, how to pump the water without sucking up sediments, how to break apart these pipes that we see when the job is done. Because you know what these pipes have in them? A lot of water. And so the pipes go up and down the undulating topography, and you have to cut them open to put them on a truck in smaller pieces and carry them away. But the act of cutting them open means water comes gushing out and creates a gully of sediment down to the water body, which by then is full of clear water. So that's a very important component of the plan. How do we break apart the pipes? We have to talk about dewatering behind the dam. The stream's already been diverted. Now we're dewatering behind the dam. And we want to have a floating pump that doesn't leak oil and a way to boom that oil and remove it if it's discharging from the pump. Sometimes we'll see an oily sheen on the water, and it's just from the vegetation. But this is dewatering the impoundment, which is different than diverting the stream, which is a clear water diversion. And so you can see that the nuisance water is constantly being pumped out at a low rate while the sediments have been removed. Well, here's a construction site where they are sucking mud off the bottom because they're not using a float. The crew on this job was simply told to sleep in their car through the night and the storm. Make sure you hear the trash pump working. But they were never given training on noticing that the sprinklers on the neighbor's wetland area were discharging mud being sucked from the bottom of the pond. And so now we have turbidity on the neighbor's property. And pile driving. A lot of times, where are we pile driving? Well, oftentimes along the stream bank, right? So, and when it comes to pile driving, what do all pile driving hydraulic hoses live for? I mean, what purpose in life does a hydraulic hose have other than busting? I mean, that's what they live for, right? They want to bust. And so when we look at the BMP called pile driving operations, what it says? It says, inspect the operations and the hoses every day. You're supposed to look at the hoses every day and ask them if they want to bust today or not. If they look frayed, well, if they're leaking, you're supposed to take action, right? Material and equipment use over water. And demolition and removing structures over water. So those are other working in water related BMPs, right? In the non-stormwater category. So pile driving, we mentioned that they need to be inspected daily. But there's a lot of guidance in there. Working over water, well, on this job, you know, the vendor showed up a day early. Which vendor? The porta potty vendor. They showed up a day early before the job started, and they put the porta potty where it was convenient for them, right next to the stream bank. So when we look at the BMP working near or over water, it'll say things like 300 feet from the stream bank, stage your equipment, stage your porta potty. Normally in our BMP manual, we have the 50-foot setback, but for in and near water, we can up the game to like 300 feet. This gives us a buffer, a chance to respond. And I'd add, you probably want a pallet of sandbags and give some containment in case it gets blown over. On this job, there were actually bears. And what do bears live for? They live for what high school teenage boys live for, knocking over porta potties. That's what bears live for too. And so you probably want some kind of containment in place before the bears show up, and have it 300 feet away. And, you know, a heavy duty. A lot of our industry, and this is a big area that we still need to solve, the idea of non-storm water protections versus housekeeping protections. This, you know, on this job, the equipment was in really good shape. Nothing dripped ever. Has anybody ever heard of that? Equipment that doesn't, what does the equipment live for? Equipment lives to drip. And yet, on this job, none of the equipment dripped. So it's very nice that they had the heavy duty containments that you can drive on and it doesn't rip them. But here's the issue. You know what we still get to have in construction sites? We still get to have messy, greasy equipment in the rain. There's no prohibition against Zerk fittings, sloppily greased. Well, we don't want to be excessively sloppily greased, but greased joints in the rain get to still exist. So the real threat is the raindrops hitting dirty equipment, not well-maintained equipment dripping on the ground. Because, you know, when the rain rains on this equipment, the greasy fittings and all that, we're going to have a big old pool of greasy water from the equipment, not from leaks. So we still haven't solved that. Well, sure, the answer is you're supposed to pump that greasy water out and dispose of it properly, but I don't like the fact that we're generating in the first place. It's almost like we should have more focus on tarping the equipment than putting a pan under it. But that's for the days ahead in our industry. And we have these rules that you're supposed to put a pan under the equipment on the bridge if the motor's turned off immediately. And I'm hoping one day that we'll stop hydroseeding the rocks in the ditch. The rocks don't sprout and grow the seeds very well. So we need to have a lot more control over the erosion control contractors who time and time again are spraying where they have no need to spray. Remember, erosion control contractors prefer to do cannon work from a truck 80 feet away. They don't want to pull hoses. And what our job is to say to the erosion control contractor, look, I know you want to do cannon work and don't want to bring 2 more people. I'm going to give you 2 of my laborers and they'll drag your hoses because I want you to drag hoses and stop spraying my river. So we have to work with them proactively so they don't show up with two people doing cannon work in a 60-mile-an-hour high-speed drive-by hydroseeding application. Demolition over water. We're always demolishing. You know, I remember when we did the Caltrans trainings, we had this one woman who worked on the Richmond Bridge, and she said, over an 18-year period, I observed Caltrans going from direct sandblasting discharge of the lead-based paint into the bay to complete shrouded protection and containment of everything. And she was there as a witness to it, that Caltrans solved the problem over years. And what an expense, what an effort. And yet, we also had somebody in class one time years ago who said, as a child, my parents wouldn't let me play in the Merced River. But today, I bring my grandchildren there, and there's no rebar and concrete and glass, and it doesn't stink anymore. So we've made a difference. Well, here's a job where they weren't supposed to be emptying the bilge water into the ephemeral stream, were they? But it still keeps happening. People still keep thinking nobody's looking. It's happening all the time. Really bad stuff is happening. And we're supposed to make a difference. There's supposed to be a plan when you're working in the water on how to handle your waste. Now, as I understand it, the Caltrans spec standards provisions still require that a manifest of where the waste is going is required. So that's pretty good standard, isn't it? So we as permit writers or SWIP developers, we could demand that all waste leaving be have a manifest, a submittal declaring where that last 10 truckloads of concrete waste went to. I've seen it go to illegal batch plants on a contractor's farmland, and now we've got concrete dust blowing into the lungs of the bicyclists driving by. It's an industrial activity. We have a few more minutes left. John, if you want to jump in, or if there are anybody with questions to answer.
Yeah,
I have
David,
a few more slides, but go ahead.
We have some questions. There's been some pretty good dialogue too going on in the chat. So I don't know if you want to scroll at some of that. First off, you mentioned scheduling, and scheduling is becoming harder and harder, as we've seen in the last few years. I mean, we had the huge rain event last October. We had the early, super early, significant rain event 2 weeks ago. We've had these unprecedented monsoons all summer long in SoCal and Death Valley and Markleeville and places where, you know, we get huge mud flows from wildfires. So just, you know, sticking to the traditional normal dry weather schedule isn't so reliable anymore. It's
right.
New challenges, I guess, that we're facing because of climate change and weather pattern changes. So that's been one of the dialogues we've been seeing this morning. Another is just about the incorporation of the environmental permits into the SWIPs. A very good point was made. They're very voluminous. You know, there's a lot of paper, a lot of pages. Maybe including them in the SWIPs might not be practicable.
Okay. I have a comment on that, John. I have this idea that we could start having 4 binders for a SWIP, you know, and so the 4th binder is labeled binder 404 SWIP, ongoing reports and inspections and documents. Okay, and binder 3 of 4 are the BMP fact sheets, and binder 2 of 4 or other plans, reference, contract documents. And binder 1 of 4 is my golden nuggets of observations and suggestions, highly bolded so that people can reach for that skinny little binder and say, I wonder what the QSD thought about this job. And if you ever want to look at the permits and other plans or BMP fact sheets or ongoing reports, they're over there on the shelf. This little skinny one is the one that's easy to reach for.
If you don't read anything else, read this. Yes. Good. Also some dialogue about, let's see, about, you were talking about not placing straw mulch or tackifiers on the rock. And also, I put in a comment there too about many times I see what the regional boards are requiring for NOTs to be approved go beyond things you're talking about, or actually violating some of the things you're talking about. Have you seen that to be true?
Well,
especially with floodplains, I'm saying.
Well, on that one dam job, where we dewatered behind the dam and built a mountain with sediment, I read all those permits over one weekend, and they had conflict in there. So that's something, and they actually had stuff that violates the principles of erosion and sediment control, like putting silt fence around a stockpile that goes up and down the hills. So we want to get the permit writers to be less conflicted and more knowledgeable, for sure. But what was the more specific part of that question, John?
Well, just when we go to file notices of termination, now photos are required, and many times they're going to that phrase in the permit that says effective soil cover. And their interpretation, for most areas are fine, but when we're dealing with areas that are meant to get wet,
right?
That's where a lot of times I see a lot of trouble and a lot of pushback and a lot of misunderstanding.
Yeah, like on those fiber rolls that were in the floodplain, to me, that's no place to be doing sediment control. That's where the floodplain needs capacity. And if the stream wants to be transporting sediments or depositing sediments or eroding sediments, the stream gets to do that in the floodplain as dynamically happens. But we don't have to be solving those things.
Right. Chris Raymer commented here, he's seen biological exclusion fences run across rivers. And those are the other folks we got to watch out for, the biologists too. They get wiped out in the rain. I think you were showing some pictures of similar situations.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, on that point, we might have to have a plan that says when we monitor the weather, we create a new condition for the critters to go across the low water crossing by having a barricade there, because we're not driving through the low water crossing when it's raining. We're off the site. So, different ideas for monitoring the weather.
Well, we only have 1 minute left, so I want to wrap this up. But I appreciate you, David, and your teaching style and the great insights you've given me. Of course, I've walked away with more Franklinisms. I always get Franklinisms. I have I've added to my list the hidden BMP, erosion control junkies. Let's see, the book no one ever reads. Of course, I've heard that before. Anacondas in the Willows. I love it. What do dams and hoses and bears and equipment live for? Thank you for adding to my list. But yeah, it's been great. Any last thoughts? And then we need to go to the next seminar.
Thanks, John, for doing this every year and being a leader in the industry. We all learn from each other, and that's the secret to success.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. We have still a few more workshops today, 4 more coming your way. Of course, you can watch any of the ones that have been recorded. We have an excellent one coming at 11 o'clock with Tully on winterization. You're going to want to watch that one. All right. See you in the next workshops.
Take care.